Hi, I'm Rebecca from the blog and YouTube channel Moon and Magnolia, and today I'm going to show you how to make the coziest and most delicious sourdough pumpkin spice cinnamon rolls. Of course, you can make pumpkin cinnamon rolls any time of day, but if you want these warm and gooey and fresh out of the oven for breakfast, I do recommend making the dough before bed. But I'm actually making these first thing in the morning simply because I need light for filming. So we are gonna make these now and then have them for dinner. I'm not opposed to cinnamon rolls for dinner at all. Okay, let's make this. I'm going to add 100 grams of sourdough starter to the stand mixer bowl. Now, on my website, the printable recipe card recommends using active and bubbly starter. I am using starter fresh out of the fridge. It's cold and unfed. Either one will work. The difference is active starter will ferment your dough faster. Inactive starter will take a little bit longer. But since I have all day to let this ferment, inactive will work just fine. And that's a really good tip for busy bakers is if you forget to feed your starter, that is okay. You can still make all the things. It just needs a little extra time. I did get a little bit too much in the bowl here. A few extra grams of starter, won't make that much of a difference. However, that was an extra 30 grams, which would make it pretty hard to achieve the right consistency or quality of the dough. So a gram or two here and there, no big deal. 30 extra grams, that's a problem. And now I'm adding in 115 grams of water. I'm going to add in 540 grams of flour, or about 4.5 cups. And this is plain old all-purpose flour. One tip I have is to keep your flour out until you are completely finished making your dough. Sometimes dough is a little bit too sticky and we have to add more flour to it while it is kneading in the stand mixer. So just keep it out on the counter just in case you need it. And now I'm going to add 150 grams of softened coconut oil, not melted. If the coconut oil is melted and hot, it can make your dough greasy, which is not what we want. If you don't have coconut oil, you can definitely just use softened butter too. That will work just fine. And these are pumpkin cinnamon rolls, so in goes 120 grams of canned pumpkin puree, a tablespoon of pumpkin spice, and I don't really measure the spices too much in this. I just kind of eyeball it. You can definitely get precise, but I just put some in until it seems like what I want. One thing to keep in mind about the spices is that the dough is spiced and so is the filling. So if you just want a touch of pumpkin spice, just give a sprinkle in the dough and then use the pumpkin spice in the filling. Or if you want a ton of pumpkin spice, use as much as you want in both. And then in goes 90 grams of honey and 80 grams of maple syrup. One of the things I really like about this recipe is I cut the sugar out and replaced it with the combination of honey and maple syrup to keep it sweet and also cozy with that maple flavor, but hopefully a little more nutritious. But in full disclosure, that filling's gonna have some brown sugar in it, so don't get too excited about it being sugar-free. And last but not least, 2 eggs. And now this just goes in the stand mixer for about 10 to 12 minutes or until it passes the Windowpane test. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. I like to start the mixer on low, and then if necessary, I use a silicone spatula to scrape the sides of the bowl. And then once those ingredients are combined, I bump up the speed to medium and let it knead for about 10 to 12 minutes. This dough is super sticky. Let me see if I can get a better view for you here, which I don't know. There we go. And you can see one way you can tell is that it's really stuck to the bottom and sides of the bowl. So that's an indication that this needs more flour. So what I'm going to do is add in 1 tablespoon of flour at a time until this is the right consistency. I want this to be tacky, but not so much that it sticks to my hands. And you can see here, I mean, it like really sticks to my hands. Okay, I added quite a bit of flour actually. I don't know why. This last batch of flour that I got from Costco has been like that. The flour itself feels damp, so it's been a little bit weird, but just add as much as you need until you can handle the dough like this. And you can see now it's not sticking to my hands. Maybe just a little bit, but that's okay. I've mentioned a lot on YouTube that a sticky, high hydration dough creates a softer product. You don't want it to be a soupy mess or all over your hands, but it is okay if it is a little bit tacky. So now that this is the right hydration and consistency, what I'm going to do is knead this until it passes the Windowpane test. So with the Windowpane test, what we're looking for is to see if you can stretch the dough and see light through it without it tearing. And as you can see here, as that dough starts to stretch, it tears into big holes. So that means we need to let it mix a little bit longer. One thing to keep in mind about dough and the Windowpane test is that enriched doughs, like the one we're making here, which simply means dough with other ingredients in it, like eggs, pumpkin, sugar, those sorts of things, they require more kneading time. In fact, it's called an intense mix. So it is normal for your enriched doughs to require more kneading time. So don't let it alarm you if you're like, man, it's been like 10 minutes and it's still not ready yet. That's pretty normal. Okay, let's see if this passes the Windowpane test yet. Oh yeah, here we go. So I see light through there, and that means it's ready. I want to give you a little bit of a close-up of that Windowpane test. So here is a piece of dough, and you can see as I stretch it, there's a thin spot where you can see light through. That might be a little hard for you to see on camera, but that means the gluten is developed, and now we can let this set aside for the rest of the day or all night to bulk ferment. If you want to learn a little bit more about how the Windowpane test works and why we use it, I will leave a link for my video tutorial and blog post about that in the description box. So before we let this bulk ferment, I just want to address the egg issue in the dough. So there are some concerns sometimes about dough with eggs and then letting it ferment for 8 to 12 hours. You can do it one of two ways. One, you can mix the eggs in like I did and let it ferment, or two, you can hold the eggs and then mix them in when you add in the baking soda and baking powder later. When you make a dough with Sourdough Starter, all of the ingredients are fermenting, including the eggs. So that changes it a little bit, but I completely understand if you were not comfortable letting the dough ferment for 8 to 12 hours with eggs in it. So don't sweat it. Put the eggs in if you want to, leave them out if you want to. Either way will work. But again, if you choose to leave the eggs out, you will need to remember to add them back in later when we put the leaveners in. One thing to note about that, if you choose that route, is that sometimes those eggs can be a little hard to mix in. So you'll want to make sure to use your stand mixer to mix the eggs in and let them mix in completely, which could take, 5 or 10 minutes sometimes in your mixer. So just a heads up about that. But don't worry about it. Either way will work. The other thing I want to mention is make sure you get your butter out of the fridge now. You will need a stick of butter for making the cinnamon roll filling. And trust me, learn from my experience. If you pop this in the microwave and it melts, it's going to ruin your cinnamon rolls. Melted butter in the filling ends up turning the filling super greasy. It makes your dough slick and almost impossible to roll. So you want softened butter, not melted butter. More than one time, I've tried to skip this step and pop it in the microwave, and I over microwaved it and it ruined everything. So put your butter out now. You will thank me later. So now I'm just going to put the dough in an oiled bowl and set it aside. Then just put the lid on and set it aside. You could also use a wet towel or beeswax wrap if that's what you have. You just want to make sure it is covered so that way the dough doesn't dry out. It is about 6 hours later, and this dough smells so good. It smells like pumpkin spice. So I ended up putting this in my proofing box just so I could control how long the bulk fermentation took, because the warmer the temperature, the faster your dough will rise. And I wanted to make sure I had enough daylight for you to see this. The next step is to get this back into the stand mixer and add in the baking soda, baking powder, and salt. If you opted to hold on the eggs during the bulk fermentation, this is when you would also add in your 2 whole eggs. I'm adding in 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of coarse kosher salt. And I'm just letting that mix for a couple of minutes until the leavener and salt is mixed completely into the dough. And now we just let this sit aside while we make our pumpkin spice filling. In a separate bowl, I'm just mixing together that softened butter. Again, make sure it is not melted. A cup of brown sugar. Like I said, this isn't sugar-free. And then a tablespoon of cinnamon and a tablespoon of pumpkin spice. So I am just turning the dough out right onto a clean counter. One little trick about rolling dough is if you use your hands to press it into the shape you want it to end up in, it's easier to roll. So if you want to roll your dough into a circle, use your hands to first shape the bulk of the dough into a circle. Or if you want to roll it into a rectangle like we do now, use your hands to press the dough into a rectangle. And now we roll. So I'm gonna roll this into, I'd say about, a 1/4 of an inch thick or so. The thinner you roll it, the more spirals you'll have in your cinnamon rolls and the gooier they'll be. So it's really just a matter of preference, but you want it to be at least, I'd say, 1/4 of an inch thick. And I often sort of oscillate between using my hands and the rolling pin just to get that rectangle shape. Don't worry if it's not a perfect rectangle, it's not that big of a deal. And then using a silicone spatula, I'm going to put the filling on the dough, leaving about 1/4 of an inch border around the dough. My butter was out for like 6 hours, but it's still actually a wee bit cool. So I'm just going to add it on there kind of like a crumble, and it'll be totally fine because as we roll it up, it will get in there, and as we bake it, it will get gooey and delicious. Using my bench scraper, I'm going to roll the dough starting from the short edge farthest away from me and roll toward myself. I've seen people roll cinnamon rolls from the long edge to long edge. Honestly, it probably doesn't matter. This is just the way I learned to do it, and it's what I have stuck with ever since. And as I'm rolling, I'm kind of pressing the ends in to keep them straight. Sometimes they end up like a total mess on the ends. It doesn't really matter if that happens, but I've been trying to keep it a little straighter just so I can get more cinnamon rolls out of it. Now, it's easiest to pick up this dough with floured hands. So I just put some flour on my hands, and that will just help me handle this dough, and I can even shape it a little bit more this way. And what I really want to do is get that dough rolled to the other side so I can pinch the seams if possible. Now, rolling the dough is a little bit easier if you have cold dough. So you could let the dough chill in the fridge just for an hour or so, just so it's a little firmer and easier to shape. But you don't have to do that, but it is a little bit softer and harder to handle, but it will still turn out totally fine. The easiest way to cut a cinnamon roll is with string. And I'm sorry, I only have white thread, so it's a little hard to see, but I am just taking a little bit of thread, doubling it over, and then just breaking it off the spool like that, and we'll use it to cut the cinnamon rolls. So all you do is take your thread, slide it under to the middle, cross it up, then over, and that will slice a perfect cinnamon roll. And then take the half on the left, do the same thing, slide it under, go about halfway, lift the string up, cross it over, and pull it in opposite directions. Do the same on the half on the right. So now we have quarters, and we can just keep doing this to make nicely even cut cinnamon rolls. You can cut as many as you want. I usually do somewhere between 8 and 14. It kind of just depends on how I rolled the dough and honestly how much I'm paying attention to what I'm doing. So anywhere between 8 and 14 and how thick you want your cinnamon rolls, that will work. Now we just put these cinnamon rolls right into a cast iron skillet. Then I pour about a half a cup of heavy cream over them. That just helps keep them nice and moist and delicious. And then these go right into the oven. These will stay in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes or until they are golden on top. And really, the best test to know whether or not they are done is the internal temperature, which can be a little tricky to take on a cinnamon roll. But the internal temperature of the center of the dough on the cinnamon roll should be somewhere between 190, preferably closer to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I made these a little bit thicker than I normally do, so my guess is they're going to take a little bit longer than usual, but either way, totally fine. During the last 10 minutes or so of baking, I like to make the cream cheese frosting. So you will need a block of cream cheese, preferably softened, but it will work too straight out of the fridge, a half a cup of cream, a half a cup of maple syrup, some vanilla, and a pinch of salt. And this is super simple. So all you do is mix the ingredients in together, heat it on low heat until that cream cheese melts. And now you can see at this point that cream cheese looks a little bit chunky. So what I like to do is take an immersion blender and blend it up. And what this does, it not only incorporates that cream cheese, but it also slightly whips the heavy cream and makes this frosting so delicious. And the trick to frosting or icing these cinnamon rolls is to let the cinnamon rolls cool a little bit and let the icing cool a little bit too. So you can totally serve them warm. Sometimes when you make bread, you have to wait until it gets to room temperature, which is always really hard to do. But for these, we want them warm and gooey, but not super hot. If the cinnamon rolls are too hot, that icing just sort of melts and goes right into them rather than being this delicious topping. And if the icing is too hot, it's just too runny. So let both of them cool for like 5 or 10 minutes or so once they are finished. And then you can pour that right on top and enjoy. This might be the most delicious looking cinnamon roll I've ever made. They're giant and they look so good. So now it's the moment of truth, if I can even get this thing. Oh my God. It's so good. Dinner is served. It is so light and so fluffy and delicious. This will be your new favorite fall breakfast. You can get the full printable version of this recipe over on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com, along with tons of other sourdough recipes. And if you are on your sourdough journey and you want to know what the next step is, I recommend checking out my Sourdough for Busy Bakers YouTube video. This is a video that will show you how to squeeze making sourdough treats like cinnamon rolls into your busy schedule. Now that you know how to make these, the Sourdough for Busy Bakers tutorial will give you ways to do it more efficiently. Also, another easy way to hang on to these instructions is to save this video on Pinterest. Just head over to the video, click share, select Pinterest, pick your board, and that is it. And last but not least, if you haven't started your sourdough journey yet and you don't know where to begin, I recommend downloading my free guide to making and using Sourdough Starter. It is 30+ pages of how to make a sourdough starter, how to make your first loaf of bread, sourdough discard recipes, and more. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and I will see you again next time. And it's true to tradition. Let me just... That's insane.